The soldier stepped on a mine and didn't even realize it. He just turned around. A colleague behind him immediately took a step with his left foot and tried to rush to his aid, but there was a click. He was also lucky enough to step on a mine. The man froze at the touch of his foot. His eyes were wide open and he didn't dare to move. But soon the wails of his companions brought him back to reality. He looked forward. He realized that his comrade's legs had been blown off. In the heat of the moment, he rushed to calm his comrade down. Under his persuasion, his comrade took out his medical kit. He gave himself a shot of analgesic, but they both know that analgesia is not enough. They need to stop the bleeding now, otherwise, they'll still die. In order to save his comrades, the man wants to release his left leg and take a big gamble. And when his comrades saw what he was doing, they pulled out their guns to stop him, in order not to drag him down, in order to prevent him from becoming an invalid like himself. He decided to shoot himself in the temple. This kind of comradeship, maybe you can only feel it when you're a soldier. The man shouted like a madman. Soon he came back to his senses. Now is not the time to grieve. He must live. He couldn't let his comrades die in vain. So the man began to adjust his position. First, he knelt down on one knee to reduce the burden on his body. Then he took out his knife and gently stabbed at his feet. I'm sure it's the sound of iron. Now he's sure it's a mine. In order to be rescued, he looks towards the radio in the distance. The distance was almost 2 meters. Suddenly he had an idea. He took out a military axe and undid his shoelaces and gun belt. He tied them together. Then he started to throw himself in front of the backpack. Once or twice, and since he couldn't use his strength in this position, the man got up to throw it. But as soon as he did, he lost his balance. Luckily, he was quick enough to use his hands to grab the ground. That's how he managed to keep his feet in place and escape. Luckily, this time he threw. The man managed to get the backpack. Then he pulled out his radio. After all the trouble he'd gone through, he finally managed to get through to headquarters. But fate seems to have played a joke on him. The chief said that due to the current sandstorm, the helicopters can't get there directly. It would be 52 hours before he could be rescued. After that, the batteries died and the signal was cut off. The man was desperate to hear this message. You know, this is the desert with no food or water. During the day, he has to endure the UV rays. At night, he has to withstand the cold. And he can't move a muscle. How can he last 52 hours? The man angrily takes off his radio. He sets his watch to count down. Then he pulls out his rations to replenish his strength. He drinks the few drops of water he has left. Suddenly, a strong wind blew. He slowly turned his head. Oh, no. There's a sandstorm that covers the sky. It's coming towards him. A sandstorm is sweeping across the sky. But the man is half kneeling in the desert, not moving. It turns out there's a landmine under his feet. Lifting his foot means death. Seeing that the sandstorm is getting closer and closer, he hurriedly took out a bandana from his bag and covered his mouth and nose. He put on his backpack to add weight. Then he touched the barrel of his sniper rifle to the sand as a support. Then he took out a knife and stuck it in the sand to hold it in place. It forms the most stable triangular structure. Soon the sandstorm hits. The world around him became dark in an instant. He couldn't open his eyes because of the sand. The wind swept through the sand. The wind swept up the sand and hit him hard. But no matter what, his feet remained motionless, and so he held on. Perhaps nature felt he was being provoked, and blew him away with a stronger wind. But in spite of all this, his feet remained firmly planted in the desert, as if they had taken root. As the man was dying, when he could not hold on any longer, the sandstorm suddenly faded. It came and went as quickly as it came. The man stood up and shook off the dust and sand. He couldn't believe it. Such a big sandstorm. He managed to get through it. Surprised, he began to look around. He found the bodies of his comrades blown to his side. He didn't feel sorry for them. After saying sorry, he dragged his mate to him and began to rummage through his body for batteries. He knew that if he could replace the batteries, he'd be able to contact HQ and get a new location and ask about the progress of the rescue. There's hope. Soon he had the batteries in his hand, but when he turned around, the radio was gone. The storm had blown him a few meters away. Looking at the deserted area in front of him, the man suddenly laughed and laughed at himself. Fate really knows how to play jokes. The batteries were delivered but the radio was sent away. After an unknown period of time, the man had already drunk all the water from his comrades. The desert sun is scorching. He's in a trance and he's not going to make it. He looks down at his watch. There are 43 hours left before he is rescued. He was devastated. He raises his gun and fires into the air, hoping to be found, whoever it is. Even if it's the enemy, capturing him would be better than suffering here. Suddenly, he raised the gun and tried to kill himself. He hesitated, but finally put it down, because he thought of his comrades. His sacrifice wasn't to kill himself. He had to hold on until the rescue team arrived. The man picks up with his dagger, a scorpion with a very strong poison. He holds it up to his eyes and examines it, looking at the poisonous needles on the tail of the scorpion. He hesitates for a long time, but he doesn't dare to put it in his mouth. He ate it to survive, not to die. Then he took out a bag full of urine. It's disgusting, but it'll keep him going for a while. As the sky darkens, the desert begins to cool. He quickly lit a fire to keep warm. Looking at the picture of his girlfriend on his mobile phone, he knew he had to keep going no matter what. Suddenly there was a hissing sound. It's the wolves. They've smelled the bodies of their comrades and they're coming together. He shoots at them, but the bullets are soon empty. The wolves swarmed at the right moment, and they bite him hard. The man struggles to keep them at bay, so that they can't hurt him. At the moment of death, the man went mad. With a small knife, he managed to kill all the wolves. Early in the morning, the man, bruised and battered, couldn't hold on any longer. He looked down. There were only 7 hours left to rescue him. Suddenly, a million images flashed through his mind. There was home. There was the hustle and bustle of the pub and the fights. And then it stops. I was having fun with my girlfriend. They drew and danced together. And now I'm going to die here in silence. Suddenly, he thought that if he could just hold on until the afternoon, he would be able to escape. His consciousness cleared. His eyes gradually became more determined. Soon the afternoon arrived. 2 figures suddenly appeared in the sand dunes in front of him. The relaxed spirit was instantly tightened. Are they rescuers? But the explosion behind him told him the answer. It looks like the enemy was the first to spot him, but he couldn't move his feet. He could only be beaten. After some thought, the man took out his pistol and pointed it at the sand in front of him, and began to try to shoot. Luck was on his side. He hit the mine. The dust was blocking the enemy's view. Then he picks up the sniper rifle on the ground and takes aim. The sound of the battle attracts a rescue team that's searching nearby. But the desert is too big, and there's a minefield nearby. He's about to miss them. The man looks towards a flare not far away. The 2 meters had become a dead end. Then he took a knife and cut open his shoe. He looked at his feet, which were sick from lack of blood flow. He looked at his feet. Then he looked at the departing convoy. He knew that if he didn't seize this opportunity, even if someone finds this leg afterwards, he could not save his leg. So he gritted his teeth and made up his mind. After taking a deep breath, he closed his eyes and stepped out. But the result? He didn't die. The man's legs instantly weakened and he fell to the ground in fear. But soon he pulled himself together again. He wanted to see what he was stepping on. He slowly pulled away the sand. He was stunned. He never dreamed he had been stepping on a can. Thinking that he had been wandering around for half a day, he fell to the ground and cried and laughed. Then he pulled out the flare. In fact, many of the things we encounter, like that landmine, you think it's going to explode if you move. That's why you're afraid to stand still and end up in bondage. If you have the mindset of fighting to the death, like the film says, you always have to move on. You will find that things are not so bad. Even when you're really in despair, there will be a ray of light. Life is not impossible. May you bravely go forward despite the difficulties and dangers.